When I first exchanged letters with Pierre de Fermat about dice and games of chance, neither of us realized we were creating the mathematical framework that would expose the fundamental irrationality of atheism. The very probability theory we developed to solve gambling problems reveals something profound. Those who claim to champion reason while rejecting God are committing the greatest logical error in human history. They're betting their entire existence on the option with infinite negative expected value while dismissing the option with infinite positive potential. Through the same mathematical rigor that solved the problem of points, I can demonstrate why atheism isn't just philosophically untenable, it's mathematically absurd. Today, you'll discover how probability theory, properly applied to life's ultimate question, makes belief in God the only rational choice available to thinking beings. Chapter 1: The Mathematical Foundation of Rational Decision-Making. When Fermat and I began our correspondence about dividing stakes in interrupted games, we established principles that revolutionized how rational beings should approach uncertainty. We discovered that intelligent decision-making under uncertainty requires calculating expected values, multiplying each possible outcome by its probability, then choosing the option with the highest mathematical expectation. This principle applies to every significant decision. When a merchant considers an investment, he calculates potential profits against risks. When a general plans a battle, he weighs probable outcomes against costs. Yet when confronting life's ultimate question, whether God exists, many abandon this mathematical rigor and choose based on emotion or cultural pressure. Consider the fundamental structure of any decision under uncertainty. We must identify all possible outcomes, assign probabilities to each, calculate the value of each outcome, then multiply probability by value to determine expected value. The rational choice is always the option with the highest expected value, regardless of which single outcome seems most likely. This mathematical framework isn't optional for rational beings. It's the foundation of logical thinking about uncertain futures. When we apply this same rigor to the question of God's existence, the results are startling. Those who pride themselves on rational thinking while embracing atheism are violating the most basic principles of mathematical decision theory. The mathematics is clear: expected value equals probability times outcome value. When outcome values approach infinity, even small probabilities generate enormous expected values. This mathematical reality transforms the entire discussion about God's existence from philosophical speculation into quantifiable analysis. The numbers don't lie, and they expose atheism's fundamental irrationality. Chapter 2: The Infinite Stakes That Change Everything. Traditional probability problems involve finite outcomes, money won or lost, games completed or abandoned. But the question of God's existence involves infinite stakes, which transforms the entire mathematical landscape. When infinite values enter probability calculations, they dominate all finite considerations with overwhelming mathematical force. If God exists, the consequences extend infinitely into eternity. Eternal bliss represents infinite positive value. Eternal separation from divine love represents infinite negative value. These aren't mere philosophical abstractions, they're mathematical realities that must be factored into any rational analysis. No finite pleasure or pain in this brief earthly existence can mathematically compete with infinite eternal consequences. When I calculate expected values for believing versus not believing in God, the mathematics becomes decisively clear. Even if we assign a tiny probability to God's existence, say 1% or even 0.1%, the infinite value of eternal consequences makes belief mathematically mandatory for rational beings. Consider this calculation carefully. If there's even a minuscule chance God exists, and if divine existence involves infinite eternal consequences, then the expected value of belief approaches infinity. Meanwhile, the expected value of atheism, which risks infinite loss for finite gains, approaches negative infinity. No rational being should choose an option with negative infinite expected value when positive infinite expected value is available. This mathematical reality doesn't depend on faith or religious sentiment. It emerges from pure probability theory applied consistently to ultimate questions. The person who rejects God while claiming allegiance to reason is committing mathematical suicide, choosing the option that rational analysis demonstrates to be infinitely inferior. Chapter 3: Examining Atheistic Probability Assessments. Atheists often claim their position is rational because they assign very low probability to God's existence. But let's examine these probability assessments using the same scientific rigor we apply to other uncertain propositions. When we do, we discover that atheistic probability assignments rest on remarkably weak foundations. First, consider the evidence available for evaluation. The universe's mathematical elegance, consciousness's emergence from matter, morality's universal appeal, and the fine-tuning of physical constants all constitute positive evidence for divine design. While none proves God's existence with certainty, each increases the probability that intelligence underlies reality. Second, examine what we don't know. Our scientific knowledge, impressive as it is, touches only a tiny fraction of reality. We understand neither consciousness nor the universe's ultimate origin. We can't explain why mathematical laws govern physical reality or why rational thought is possible. Given these vast knowledge gaps, assigning very low probability to divine existence requires extraordinary intellectual confidence about matters beyond empirical investigation. Third, consider the philosophical arguments. The cosmological argument from causation, the teleological argument from design, and the moral argument from universal ethical intuitions all provide rational grounds for theistic belief. While not demonstrative proofs, they shift probability calculations in theism's favor. Most atheists, when pressed to quantify their confidence, admit they can't assign zero probability to God's existence. They might claim 90% or 99% confidence in atheism, but few claim absolute certainty. Yet even these high confidence levels prove insufficient when infinite stakes are involved. If there's any significant probability of divine existence, even 5 or 10%, the mathematical case for belief becomes overwhelming. The honest atheist must admit, I cannot be certain God doesn't exist, but I'm betting my eternal destiny on this uncertainty. This isn't rational skepticism, it's mathematical recklessness. Chapter 4: The False Symmetry Fallacy. Many atheists attempt to escape probability theory's implications by claiming symmetry. Maybe the Christian God exists, but maybe Allah exists, or maybe Zeus exists. Since these cancel each other out, atheism remains rational. This argument reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of both probability theory and theological reasoning. First, this objection treats all theistic possibilities as mutually exclusive when many share essential features. If evidence points toward divine existence, it supports theism generally, not just specific denominational claims. The probability that some form of divine reality exists is much higher than the probability that any particular religious system is completely accurate. Second, the symmetry argument ignores qualitative differences between religious claims. Some religious traditions offer coherent metaphysical systems supported by sophisticated philosophical arguments, historical evidence, and transformative spiritual experiences. Others lack such support. Rational probability assessment must weigh these qualitative differences, not treat all religious claims as equally probable. Third, most major theistic traditions agree on fundamental points: divine existence, moral accountability, and eternal consequences for human choices. Even if specific doctrinal details remain uncertain, the core theistic framework receives support from multiple independent sources. Consider the mathematical reality. Suppose we assign equal probability to Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and several other theistic systems. Even if each receives only a small individual probability, their combined probability of some form of theism being true might reach 30, 40, or 50%. Against this combined theistic probability, atheism, which denies any divine reality, becomes increasingly untenable. The symmetry objection also reveals a crucial misconception. The choice isn't between specific denominational claims but between theistic and atheistic worldviews. Does intelligence underlie reality, or doesn't it? Are moral values objective, or aren't they? Do human choices have eternal significance, or don't they? These fundamental questions admit of essentially two answers, and probability theory reveals which choice rational beings should make. Chapter 5. The cost-benefit analysis of belief systems. Beyond pure probability calculations, rational decision-making requires analyzing the costs and benefits of different choices. When we apply rigorous cost-benefit analysis to belief systems, the mathematical superiority of theism becomes even more apparent. Consider the costs of religious belief. Some claim religious faith requires sacrificing intellectual honesty or scientific understanding. But this assumes faith conflicts with reason, which contradicts the experience of countless scientists, philosophers, and scholars who find their religious beliefs enhance rather than diminish their intellectual pursuits. The supposed costs of belief often prove illusory upon careful examination. Meanwhile, examine the genuine costs of atheism. If God exists, atheism leads to eternal separation from the source of all goodness, beauty, and truth. This represents infinite loss, literally the worst possible outcome for any conscious being. No finite earthly pleasure can compensate for infinite eternal loss. But even in purely temporal terms, atheism carries significant costs. It drains life of ultimate meaning, reduces human dignity to arbitrary social convention, and offers no foundation for moral responsibility. It provides no hope beyond death's finality and no purpose beyond temporary pleasure. These aren't trivial losses, they're the very things that make human existence meaningful. Contrast this with belief's benefits. If God exists, faith opens access to infinite love, eternal purpose, and ultimate meaning. It provides moral foundation, hope beyond death, and relationship with the source of all existence. Even if God doesn't exist, many believers report that faith enhances their earthly experience through community, purpose, and ethical framework. The mathematical analysis is clear. Belief offers infinite potential benefit with minimal genuine cost. Atheism offers minimal benefit with infinite potential cost. Any rational cost-benefit analysis points decisively toward belief. Those who choose atheism while claiming rational superiority are making the most irrational choice possible, risking infinite loss for marginal finite gain. Chapter 6. Responding to common atheistic objections. Sophisticated atheists raise several objections to probabilistic arguments for theism. Each objection deserves careful analysis, but none escapes the mathematical reality that makes atheism fundamentally irrational. Some argue that believing for pragmatic reasons rather than genuine conviction is psychologically impossible and theologically worthless. This objection misunderstands both human psychology and religious experience. Rational analysis often precedes and enables genuine conviction. When people recognize the mathematical case for belief, they often find themselves increasingly open to spiritual experience and genuine faith. The wall between rational belief and heartfelt faith proves more porous than critics assume. Others claim that a loving God wouldn't condemn people for honest intellectual doubt. This objection assumes atheism represents honest intellectual inquiry rather than rational abdication. But we've seen that atheism contradicts probability theory's clear implications. Genuine intellectual honesty, following rational analysis wherever it leads, points toward theistic belief. The person who claims intellectual honesty while rejecting mathematical evidence isn't doubting honestly, they're avoiding uncomfortable conclusions. Some argue that religious belief systems are too uncertain to justify strong commitment. But this objection ignores how rational decision-making works under uncertainty. We don't need certainty to make rational choices, we need sufficient probability combined with appropriate stakes. Given infinite eternal consequences, even modest probability of divine existence justifies strong commitment to theistic belief. The most sophisticated objection claims that infinite payoffs make probability calculations meaningless because any finite probability multiplied by infinity yields infinity. But this proves too much. It would make all decision-making impossible when eternal consequences are involved. Instead, we should recognize that when infinite stakes are involved, any non-zero probability of theism makes belief mathematically mandatory. Each atheistic objection, when examined carefully, either misunderstands the mathematical argument or confirms its force by showing how enormous the stakes really are. Chapter 7: The Experimental Method Applied to Spiritual Reality. As someone who helped establish experimental methodology in physics through my work with atmospheric pressure and vacuum, I understand the importance of testing theoretical predictions through practical experience. The same experimental approach that validates scientific theories can validate spiritual hypotheses. The mathematical argument for theism generates testable predictions. If God exists and desires relationship with human beings, then sincere seekers who approach divine reality with proper methodology should experience meaningful spiritual encounters. This prediction can be tested through careful experimentation. Design your spiritual experiment carefully. Begin with the mathematical analysis that demonstrates theism's rational superiority. Recognize that intellectual assent to God's probable existence is the first step, not the final destination. Then embark on genuine spiritual seeking, prayer, meditation, study of religious texts, engagement with believing communities, and moral purification that prepares the heart for divine encounter. Monitor the results with scientific honesty. Do you experience what believers call divine presence? Does moral transformation begin occurring? Do previously meaningless experiences gain significance? Does life's fundamental questions receive satisfying answers? Do you encounter what seems like divine guidance in important decisions? Many who conduct this experiment report remarkable results. They find that theoretical probability calculations give way to experiential certainty. Mathematical arguments for God's existence become less important as direct spiritual experience provides stronger evidence. The initial wager transforms into genuine relationship. This experimental approach addresses atheistic concerns about mere intellectual belief. When probability theory opens the door to spiritual seeking, and spiritual seeking leads to genuine encounter, the original mathematical argument achieves its purpose. It breaks through intellectual resistance that prevents people from conducting the spiritual experiment that could transform their lives. The experimental method that revolutionized natural science can revolutionize spiritual life. But the experiment requires genuine commitment to follow evidence wherever it leads, including toward spiritual realities that materialistic prejudice refuses to acknowledge. Conclusion. The probability theory that Fermat and I developed for gambling problems reveals atheism's fundamental irrationality. When infinite eternal consequences are at stake, even small probabilities of divine existence make theistic belief mathematically mandatory. Those who reject God while claiming rational superiority are violating the basic principles of logical decision-making under uncertainty. They're choosing the option with infinite negative expected value while dismissing the option with infinite positive potential. This isn't rational skepticism, it's mathematical madness. The honest seeker must acknowledge that rigorous probability analysis points decisively toward theistic belief. And once mathematical analysis opens this door, Experimental spiritual seeking can transform theoretical probability into experiential certainty. The mathematics don't lie. Atheism isn't just philosophically problematic, it's mathematically absurd.